Hi, welcome back. We're going to continue on with our program with our next subject is PFAS with Dusty Horwitt. He's a consultant with the Environment and Health Program of Physicians for Social Responsibility. So let's please welcome Dusty Horwitt.
So I'm a consultant with Physicians for Social Responsibility, and I'm going to be talking about our recent report on the use of PFAS or forever chemicals in Pennsylvania's oil and gas wells. This report is one of a series of reports that Physicians for Social Responsibility has been publishing since July of 2021 on the use of forever chemicals in oil and gas wells. We first started looking into this topic as a result of a Freedom of Information Act request that I helped file years ago with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. We asked for the EPA's reviews of chemicals that had been proposed for use in the oil and gas industry under the Toxic Substances Control Act, which is the federal law that is designed to help protect us from chemical risks before those, in part, before those chemicals, the new chemicals can be used commercially. What we found as a result of the Freedom of Information request and thousands of documents that EPA disclosed in response is that in 2010 and 2011, EPA had reviewed 3 chemicals proposed for use in oil and gas wells and was concerned that they could break down into a chemical similar to PFOA, which is the most infamous type of PFAS. And EPA was also concerned that these chemicals could have very serious health impacts. Nonetheless, EPA approved the chemicals for commercial use. One of them went into commercial use, and we tried to find it by looking at chemical disclosure records. We couldn't, but we did find that PFAS or chemicals that could break down into PFAS had been used in hundreds of oil and gas wells across the country. And that set in motion this series of reports that we have published. We have been focused on state-specific use of PFAS in oil and gas wells. Our most recent report is this one on the use of PFAS in oil and gas wells in Pennsylvania. And so what I want to share is the somewhat limited scope of PFAS use that has been disclosed in oil and gas wells in Pennsylvania, and the potentially much larger use of PFAS use that could be present in oil and gas wells in Pennsylvania, but hidden by the state's lax chemical disclosure rules. So why is it that we're so concerned about PFAS? PFAS have been used in the economy since the 1940s for many, many different purposes. They have valuable properties. They're stain resistant, water resistant, oil resistant, water resistant. They can be very slippery, but they also have many negative or several negative properties. Let me go to the next slide here. Oops, there we go. One is that they don't break down in the environment, and that's why they're called forever chemicals. Another is that they're toxic at microscopic concentrations. To understand just how microscopic, consider that the US EPA earlier this year proposed to regulate several different types of PFAS in drinking water. They set a maximum contaminant level for PFOA at just 4 parts per trillion. At that level of concentration, 1 measuring cup of PFOA would be enough to contaminate 28 billion gallons of water to an unsafe level. That's more than 90 times the amount of drinking water that Philadelphia treats and distributes to customers every day. So these chemicals can be extremely toxic. They spread easily in water, and they're linked to multiple negative health impacts. Some of them are displayed on this slide. These are impacts that have been shared by the US EPA and the CDC. Those include increased cholesterol levels, low birth weight in babies, increased risk of kidney cancer, increased risk of testicular cancer, increased risk of high blood pressure in pregnant women, a condition called preeclampsia, and decreased vaccine response, which of course is a major concern in the age of COVID. We don't know, there has not been enough research yet to know whether because of exposures to PFAS through oil and gas operations, people have experienced these type of health impacts. But we do know that some of these health impacts or health impacts consistent with these problems have been found among populations living near oil and gas wells, including increased risk of heart disease, which could be related to higher cholesterol levels, and low birth weight babies. So we do need more research on whether there's a link between PFAS use in oil and gas wells and negative health impacts. Another reason we're concerned about the use of PFAS in oil and gas wells is because there are multiple pathways through which PFAS or other chemicals used in these wells can come into contact with people or the environment. This is a cross-section of a oil and gas well underground published by the US EPA. You can see this, the surface up at the top of the picture, and then what the companies do to develop their wells is they drill straight down through the earth and the rock. They go down through the groundwater, which is this layer up here of blue, and they do that before they put any kind of protective layers in the well. And those layers are in the middle of the well. This bluish gray layer is hollow cylindrical steel casing that they insert in the well, and then they pump down the casing cement, which hits the bottom of the well and then fills up back to the surface along the side of the casing. The goal is to create an impenetrable barrier between the groundwater and the well so that the groundwater can't come in and the chemicals can't go out, or the oil and gas can't go out. However, as this slide shows, there can be multiple leaks and gaps in oil and gas wells that can allow chemicals, potentially PFAS, to exit out into the groundwater. Leaks in the casing, leaks in the cement, gaps between the cement and the casing. So there are potential pathways through the well for chemicals to get into the groundwater. In addition, oil and gas wells, as many people may know, produce a lot of waste, especially wastewater. This is a photograph of a fluids impoundment in Amwell Township in Washington County, Pennsylvania. This was one of several impoundments in this area operated by Range Resources that had a number of leaks and spills associated with them that contaminated groundwater and soil, and led the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection to issue a more than $4 million fine against Range. The companies generate so much waste in part because of hydraulic fracturing, which occurs after that drilling process is complete. In fracking, companies pump millions of gallons of water into their wells, typically mixed with chemicals and sand. The water exits the well deep underground, fractures the formation under very high pressure. The companies then turn off the pressure. That fluid reverses and comes back up out of the well, where it is collected in the form of wastewater. That wastewater could contain the PFAS or other toxic chemicals that were injected into the well as naturally occurring contaminants. As I mentioned, that wastewater can leak and spill. The preferred method of disposal for the oil and gas companies is to re-inject the wastewater underground in underground injection disposal wells. Those wells have been known to leak, and the fluid can get into groundwater where it can cause contamination that can be almost impossible to clean up. So there are waste disposal routes of contamination as well that we're concerned about. And there can be air pathways of contamination. If wells are vented or flared, that is, if excess gas is burned off or allowed to escape from oil and gas wells where PFAS has been injected, some of that PFAS could become airborne. It could be deposited on soil or surface water. If gas migrates into people's homes, the gas could come out of the water inside people's homes. If it has PFAS in it, there could be an exposure route through that pathway as well. So for our report, we looked at a database called Frac Focus that is the repository of fracking chemical disclosure for unconventional gas wells fracked in Pennsylvania. We did not look at fracking chemical disclosure for conventional oil and gas wells because it's much more difficult to access, unfortunately, which is one of the major shortcomings of Pennsylvania's oil and gas chemical disclosure. But what we found for unconventional gas wells is that over the past decade, PFAS in the form of PTFE or Teflon had been used in 8 unconventional gas wells. And you can see them here on the western edge of Pennsylvania. They are represented by the red dots. The concern about PTFE or Teflon is not so much the substance itself. It's a form of plastic. The major concern is that Teflon has been manufactured with very toxic other types of PFAS, including PFOA. And the concern is that those other types of PFAS may remain on the Teflon as impurities and leach out when the Teflon is used in the environment. But the larger story in Pennsylvania is not so much the use of PFAS that has been disclosed, it's the potentially much greater use of PFAS that is not disclosed. And you can see these other dots on the map in gold and blue, both in southwestern Pennsylvania and northeastern Pennsylvania, represent wells that have been injected with trade secret chemicals. Under Pennsylvania law, oil and gas companies can withhold their chemical identities from the public as trade secrets. The blue dots represent wells injected with trade secret surfactants, which are of particularly high concern because surfactants, which are like soaps would be surfactants, they reduce the surface tension between two liquids or a liquid and a solid. Surfactants contain a subcategory called fluorosurfactants, which contain multiple types of PFAS. Those are represented by the blue dots. And then the gold dots represent wells injected, unconventional gas wells injected with some type of trade secret chemical. We can't be sure what, but any of these trade secret chemicals could be PFAS. And there are more than 5,000 oil and gas wells over the past decade that were injected more than 5,000 unconventional gas wells in Pennsylvania were injected with at least one trade secret chemical. You can see on this table the counties in which these wells were located, injected with at least one trade secret chemical. That's this column here. You can see the total number at the bottom. More than 5,000 of these wells are in Pennsylvania. The total amount of these trade secret chemicals was 160 million pounds. If even a small percentage of that were PFAS, that could be an enormous amount of PFAS used in these wells. This column, second from the right, shows the number of wells per county injected with at least one trade secret surfactant. That's more than 1,200 over the past decade, and that amount totaled almost 5 million pounds, which again could be a very significant amount of PFAS. There are several pieces of evidence suggesting that at least some of these trade secret chemicals could be PFAS. One is a 2023 paper that just came out, authored by the U.S. Geological Survey and the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, which identified oil and gas wells as among the facilities that have been documented as potential sources of PFAS. This study, in turn, cited several other studies, two of which we cite in our report. One of those is a 2020 paper by Julianne Glug and other authors, which found that PFAS, especially fluorosurfactants, had been proposed for use or used in oil and gas wells going back to 1956. And the paper found that it had been used or proposed for use in multiple purposes, including for drilling and fracking. Another source is a 2008 paper by Murphy and Hewitt, which found that fluorosurfactants had been used in oil and gas activities for 40 years, which goes back to the 1960s. and their use was expected to grow as the author said, in 2008. And then we also looked deeper at the focus fracking chemical disclosure data for Pennsylvania and other states, and found that 15 companies operating oil and gas wells in Pennsylvania had fracked oil and gas wells in other states with PFAS and had not disclosed the use of those PFAS in Pennsylvania, raising questions about whether maybe some of these companies have been using PFAS in Pennsylvania on an undisclosed basis. Our report includes this table, which shows several examples of wells in Pennsylvania, unconventional gas wells injected with PFAS or trade secret chemicals. If you just look at the bottom example on the slide, a well was fracked by Seneca Resources Corporation in 2021 in Tioga County. It was fracked with proprietary surfactant blend, which is a trade secret chemical. We can't be sure what that is, but it was used in an amount of more than 23,000 pounds. That's a huge quantity of chemical, especially if that chemical is a PFAS. Our report also enables users to use an interactive map to zoom in on these wells to see exactly where they are and to see if some of these wells injected with PFAS or trade secret chemicals might be in their communities. Here you have an example of a well in western Pennsylvania near the Ohio border that was fracked with PTFE or Teflon. And if you click on the wells, you get this pop-up menu that shows more information about them. One of the key pieces of information is this one at the top, the API number, which is a unique numeric identifier assigned to each oil and gas well. And then you can take that number and go to the frac focus database and use their find a well function. You can to put that API number in their search field. Then you hit search, and you get this this page here, which has two PDFs. If you click on the first PDF, you'll see the original fracking chemical disclosure that was shared with the frac focus database. If you go to the second page of this fracking chemical disclosure sheet, you'll see that one of the chemicals injected was polytetrafluoroethylene, otherwise known as PTFE or Teflon. One of the points we emphasize in the report is that it's not just the area right around these wells that are at risk of contamination with PTFE. You can also have the waste taken to facilities miles away. This map created by Frac Tracker Alliance shows the 8 wells in red that were injected with PTFE, and then all these yellow triangles are places where the waste was taken for disposal. Those places could be at risk of contamination if there is PFAS in the waste. This is another well in northeastern Pennsylvania. It was injected with at least one trade secret surfactant. If you go to the right of the map, you'll see the squiggly line, which is the Delaware River Basin. There's concern that waste could be taken to the basin and disposed of, could have PFAS in it and contaminate the Delaware River, which is a drinking water source for millions of people. And finally, we have several recommendations, including halting PFAS use in oil and gas extraction and expanding public disclosure of oil and gas chemicals. These were elements of a law passed last year by Colorado, which did exactly what we recommended, ban PFAS use in oil and gas wells, and requires full public disclosure of chemicals used in the wells with no exceptions for trade secrets, and also importantly requires disclosure from chemical manufacturers who are in the best position to know what chemicals are being used in oil and gas wells. And so with that, I'll stop and open it up to questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Yep. Thank you, Dusty. We have a couple minutes for questions. Go ahead.
Thanks, Dusty. Are other states that you have studied as poorly regulated regarding chemical disclosures as PA?
I'm sorry, could you just repeat that question? I missed the first minute.
Yeah. Are other states that you have studied as poorly regulated regarding chemical disclosures as Pennsylvania?
Generally, the regulation is pretty poor. There are only a handful of states that do it relatively well. Colorado has the best law on the books now. California is also pretty good. It requires full disclosure of fracking chemicals without exceptions for trade secrets. California's major drawback is that its disclosure system does not extend to the other chemicals injected into oil and gas wells, like drilling chemicals. But it's pretty good. Those two states are probably the best, and then a couple other states like West Virginia and Wyoming, as well as California, require disclosure before fracking begins, which is also a step forward.
Great, thank you. Quick question on the data. Do you have any data on the use of possible PFAS chemicals by CNX?
We don't, but we do have information in the report about the use of trade secret chemicals by CNX. They have used at least one trade secret chemical in, I think it was 43 wells in Pennsylvania over the last decade. And I know that CNX did have an agreement recently with Governor Shapiro. So that information is certainly relevant to that agreement. I will say quickly, I saw in that agreement that CNX said that they will make chemical disclosure and they'll try to make full chemical disclosure, but they can't when chemical manufacturers make the trade secret claims. There's evidence that typically the trade secret claims are made by the chemical manufacturers. So that would mean it would be unlikely that CNX or other oil and gas companies could make full disclosure even if they wanted to. And that's why Colorado's law is so important, because it requires disclosure, not just from the oil and gas companies, but the chemical manufacturers as well. And that's a good model for Pennsylvania and other states to follow.
Great. Time for one more?
One more, get quick.
This question regarding what I believe one of the maps you showed. Where is the waste disposed in your map showing yellow triangles? These can't all be landfills, so how is this waste being disposed of?
It's disposed of in a variety of ways. I can't recall all of the different ways offhand, but I think some of them are landfills, some are underground injection wells, and there may be some other types of facilities thrown in there. But if you contact me, I can get you the full list.
Great, thanks. And one more quick one. When is the West Virginia report expected to come out?
Soon. We're working on it.
Thank you. Thank you, Dusty. Thank you for that very informative presentation, and to all of our previous speakers of the day.